Hi, everybody, and welcome to Embedding CX into your organization. I want to thank everybody for listening in today, and I'd like to hand it over to our webinar host today, Diane Major from the CXPA.
Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to be hosting some very special guests today. We have Dan Morose from MOO, Grace Sikapuku from Chief Customer Officer from AIG Hilton. Three practitioners who have for years embedded CX in their organizations. Let's talk a little bit about the topic today. It's important to think about when we're changing an organization to be more customer and employee centric, that it needs to become part of the everyday of what we do. And we're going to define today, why transformation needs to be part of every activity and touch everyone in an organization. We're going to share some ways to create shifts in thinking, behaviors, process, decision making, and give examples. One of the core foundations of this webinar is a little bit of the how-to and examples so that you can actually go back and do some things immediately. And then understanding a little bit about the impact of making those changes as it relates to our profession. So I'm going to start by having each of our webinar guests introduce themselves and share a little fun fact about themselves so that we get to know them a little bit. Dan, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. My name is Dan Morose. I'm the Director of Customer Experience at MOO. MOO is an online print and design company founded in 2006. We've got about just under 600 employees across 6 different offices in the US and the UK. And cool fact, I've got 2. The first one is that I'm employee number 7 at MOO, which means that I have 007 printed on my payslip. And the second is that I once performed on stage at Glastonbury Music Festival.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. Thank you, and welcome today. Grace.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Grace Sikapuku. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at AIG South Africa. And I've been with AIG for just over 2 years now. I think that a cool fact that a lot of people don't know about me is I used to choreograph dance. And I still would love to do it, but I just don't have time now.
Because you're too busy changing organizations. So the first thing that we're going to talk about this morning is transformative change. And I add the word transformative because I think change happens so rapidly around us every day in this day and age that we're truly transforming organizations. I want to kind of start with how in customer experience this is a key component and probably 95% of what we do. And let's start with you, Dan, a little bit about, what is transformative change and why is it so hard for organizations to make a move?
I mean, the first thing I would say is that every organization is different. And that every organization will have different complexities and challenges. Different businesses have different key areas of differentiation or focus. So, for example, at MOO, historically, we've been really differentiated based on our product, which means a lot of our internal organization was centered around product and technology. And I think that means that the challenge for each of us in our own organizations can be, there's no single path to transform. It's constantly evolving depending on the organization and the level of maturity within that organization. And some companies will start with one foot on the first rung of the ladder. Maybe they're already relatively customer centric or think that they are. So I think the biggest challenge, I'd say, is that transformation isn't linear. It's very complex and can take very many different paths.
So that's interesting. So there's no cookie cutter. So you're saying there's not one size fits all. There's no silver bullet. But it sounds like it means that we need to have different tools and approaches and lots of tricks up our sleeve, if you will, to think about change and helping an organization move along. Grace, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I think just to agree and add to what Dan has said, transformation for each organization takes on a different kind of persona, if you want to use that word, because you really have to weigh in and see where the company is headed and what's good, what's the tool for this month, or what's the tool for this quarter, because things are dynamic in organizations, and so we have to be very adaptable and very flexible. Today you might have new leadership coming in, and all of a sudden maybe customize the flavor of that month. So you have the opportunity to do things at the forefront. You have an opportunity to have leading sessions to talk about how you put the customer at the center of everything that you do. It could be tomorrow a new leader comes in and profitability is the big flavor of the month. Now you need to think tactically how you're going to bring in the customer element using profitability as the weapon, or how you show that if a company is going to be profitable, it has to put the customer at the center of everything they do. So we have to be dynamic, and it's really challenging, but it's also exciting, I think, in a way, as we try to transform our organizations.
Yes, I think CX professionals often love the challenge. It's because it is such a large one of change. But I love what you said about being adaptable and understanding, one, who the stakeholders are and what the goals are for those particular stakeholders, especially as leadership changes, because we all know that happens and the winds shift a bit. But I also liked what you said about having a plan, understanding what the change looks like that you're looking for. I know sometimes when I ask professionals what, you want the organization to change, but exactly what is it you want them to do differently? And they really don't have an answer. So I think that's a great definition and a good takeaway for our audience is, helping define, if you want the organization to work differently, what exactly are you asking them to do? So great takeaway. So let's go on to a little bit of the base question I always kind of talk about. And that is really why does our way of working need to change? We know that this is transformation. We know that there's a lot going on. We know that we want, as I said, behaviors and thinking to change. Why do we struggle so much in an organization? So let me start over again. So why does our way of working need to change? What's the why for the organization when we're talking to them? Grace, you want to start?
Yeah, so I think the why is really why a business exists, right? And so if the business wants to be sustainable, we have to look at the things that the business is doing, and if the customers are actually experiencing a good experience when they engage the company. So I think the why is really around why does the business exist, and how are we fulfilling the need of our customers. So it's really, and some practical examples, looking at customer data. We need to understand what our customers saying about us when they engage the company. What or is there even customer feedback that we are not receiving? We need to look at some business evidence. Is the company profitable, or is the company not being successful? So there's many things that you can look at to answer the why, and that will start to give you an indication of why the business needs to transform and why the business needs to change. If we continue doing things the way we've been doing things, then obviously we will continue to yield the same results that we currently yielding. So for me, it's really about going back to why do we exist as a business, and that's the purpose of the organization, and are we meeting our customers' need, which is the reason why the business exists in the first place. And after you're able to identify and unpack those answers, you will then start to see the reason, which is the why, in the answering the question you're asking. with the need then to transform.
Terrific. Dan, do you want to weigh in on that? What's the why?
I mean, I think the why can be very different, again, depending on the organization type that you are. I think typically in olden days, if you like, things were much more commercially, very, very narrowly commercially focused and fixated on kind of money in, money out. I think looking at, again, the reason that that we exist as companies is super important. And I don't think it's only the customer. I think it's a kind of virtuous cycle between three parts of the organization. And it's not just why do we need to put customer on a pedestal, but it's why do we need to balance our thinking across what I would kind of call the three key pillars, which is the customer, the employee, but also essentially the shareholder or the bottom line. And if we don't nourish each of those three strands, then that virtuous cycle can quickly end up being a vicious one. And I think businesses that don't focus on change and constantly looking at and evaluating their structure and their ways of working are probably the ones that will cease to exist because they haven't paid enough attention to one or more of those three strands.
Oh, that's very interesting. It's a great framework to put things in. Grace?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that in saying that if you don't, sometimes with businesses, we get so internally focused, and it's a great framework to work with using the employee, customer, and the shareholder. But sometimes we forget about what's happening in our industry and the disruptors that are even coming that are outside our industry. So looking at, and just really adding to what Dan was saying, looking at what's happening from a landscape perspective, that will also be a catalyst to for you as a business to start changing and wanting to transform, because then you'll also get left behind and cease to exist.
Very, very nice.
Totally agree.
That's great. So let's talk a little bit then about how we gain traction in this. So we talk about change. It sounds like a good takeaway here is, have a plan, have several tools in your arsenal, be flexible, be adaptable. How do we really get traction? This is where I think if we start to share as practitioners some of the ways we've actually gotten traction and seen that change and what's really worked. So Dan, would you start with some examples of how you have gained traction in making change happen?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll give a very a customer service centered view. So I started off in the customer service side of the organization, and no one at Moo really owned voice of customer. And in order to kind of gain that initial traction, I managed somehow to convince my boss that I was the right person to own the collation and curation of that voice and share it internally. So it wasn't, my job title didn't change. I remained the director of customer service, but I took on kind of extracurricularly this responsibility for, shaping a voice of customer program, and then tried to find a couple of opportunities to really highlight a pain point or an opportunity, and then convince a few internal stakeholders that there was an opportunity to make a change and then measure the impact of that change. So I think finding something where you can prove, finding a way of proving that there's value in understanding the voice of customer, finding a pain point and then resolving it and then showing that there's a material impact is probably a good starting point, but very much kind of foot in the door territory, but is a good starting point if there is no such customer experience focus in a business.
That's great. Grace, do you have some examples of gaining traction?
I think in an organization, depending on its maturity, its customer-centric maturity, you could use voice of customer or even complaints. So if in the company, there will always be someone who looks after complaints, even if customer centricity has never been a focus. So looking at the complaints data, there's also another way of starting to prove or starting to show what areas of focus the business could be channeling their focus. I can't find the right word to use. But essentially, if you look at your complaints data, the complaints data normally tells you what customer pain points there are. And also it tells you where customers are frustrated. And we've done that here at AIG, looking at there's typically 4 areas that you could use as themes. So it could be your product, it could be people, it could be process, or it could be your systems. So looking at the complaints data, we started to channel to say what are the key issues that are within products that we need to fix? What are the key issues within the process that we need to fix? And slowly, as we started doing this work, we realized that we had a people issue and we had a process issue. A lot of the times we like to revert saying that the system is the issue because the system is archaic or whatever the case may be. But if the system has been in existence for the past 10 years, there are workarounds that you may have developed as a team, whether it's within service or within the claims team. And I work in insurance, so that's the example I'm using. And looking at the complaints data and just categorizing it like that, we started to gain traction with management, and for management to start saying, okay, if these are the areas of complaints and the areas of focus within these 4 pillars, then perhaps we need to start working on those to start eliminating the root causes. And slowly the CX thing started becoming a trend to say, okay, customer experience is actually helping us to improve what we deliver for our customers. And our staff are starting to understand that we need to change our processes, and changing our processes will actually enhance our customer experience. So that is another great example of how to start getting traction, but just using the data that is available within the company.
Yeah, that's
and I think there's a way to even...
Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to add very quickly, I think when we started doing that at Moo, one thing that was particularly helpful was trying to help other stakeholders in the business to understand the cost, even if it's a very primitive way of measuring it, looking at the cost of those inefficiencies or looking at, the bottom line impact of, remunerating customers for those issues. So if you can tie things to any, money talks, so the more you can tie it to commercial things, the easier it will be to convince people that we should be focusing on those things.
Yeah, that you're right, and that goes back to really understanding your stakeholders as well. So everybody has their goals and what they're trying to accomplish, and I think understanding those and building that case stand for what they're trying to achieve. So that it harks back to an example that I have of an organization that was building kind of new products, and they had several new product developers teams that were building products and kind of shoving them out the door without really designing them. So we found a very an eager, as I would say, someone who was very interested in using design thinking and customer feedback to really build a better product, if you will, and partnered with them and really engaged with the team. And then as we began to launch and test the product, we began to understand how this product is going to be different in adoption rates and less calls to the call center because we'd done testing and it avoided some of those pieces. So there was definitely this, find the right folks, get embedded, and then share those results you said, Dan, and then share the story. So we started to get knocks on the door from other folks saying, I didn't realize this is what design could do. I didn't understand the process. I thought it would slow us down. And so it's really dispelling some of those myths to get people to see the change outside of themselves, so that they say, oh, I see, that wasn't so bad, that I can do that as well. As a matter of fact, that's a better way of doing things. So we always have to have those demonstrations, and I think that's the storytelling piece that comes out as CX professionals. Mm-hmm. All right, so we're going to get down to a very, I think the meat of what we're doing, and I think I just gave an example of how I have seen progress in an organization, but Grace, why don't you start this time with just share some examples of how you've actually embedded CX in an organization.
So I think, and again, I'm going to use an example here. when I arrived at AIG South Africa, customer experience is actually still isn't as a focus for the business. We talk of voice of customer, the feedback. People understand that, but they don't understand customer experience holistically. So one of the things I started doing, and again, you have to check the kind of organization you're working with, and really check your stakeholders, understand your stakeholders' needs, understand the direction of the company, and the appetite, and that will all inform how you approach things. So initially, I engaged our exco and shared with them what voice of customer can do. And obviously that started to be something that they wanted more of. So the business started saying, okay, how do we invest more in listening to our customers and listening to our intermediaries? And then I realized that even though the leadership, when I started working with the staff, the people on the ground who actually do the work, I quickly realized that there was a gap in understanding what CX is. So what I started doing was, in general meetings where we talk about service, or if we have a complaints meeting where we talk about complaints, I would sit in those meetings and be that voice to say, have we thought about this? Have we thought about this? Have you looked at it in this way? So looking at, maybe the claims processes, have you considered maybe looking at your process? So what I was starting to do intentionally is dropping thoughts in people's minds of trying to change the way they think. And I found that quite useful, because when you finish the meeting, you would have someone want to have an off-site meeting with you to say, can you tell me more about this? And I started to gain people's interest, and people wanted to know more about what putting the customer at the center means in their business. And I mean, it's worked phenomenally in such a way that people are now leading the discussions and wanting to engage me more. Which has kind of changed the appetite of the business. Because initially, it was a very product-focused business. How many products are we selling? How many customers how is our customer number doing? How is the broker number doing? And people are very focused on, revenue. And now people are saying, oh, how do we improve the customer experience? Because it's going to reduce my complaints rate, which means that my claims team can now focus on what they need to do instead of dealing with complaints so much. And our processes will also improve, meaning that the customers will also say that they're experiencing things easier for us. And so it's a win-win in the end. So now the mindset has started shifting, which is one based on the stuff that I started doing in the business.
Very interesting. Great example. Dan, do you have an example?
Yeah, I mean, I've got two. I'll do one very quick one and one a bit longer. But when I used to run the contact center, we often were left out of the conversation. And there was only one of me to go around. So similar to what Grace was saying, I would go to meetings and advocate for customers and speak up on their behalf and kind of be very suggestive. And you gain a certain level of traction that way, but you kind of can't be in every room at every time. So we implemented something called CX liaisons, where we basically took all of the kind of key departments who are making decisions that impacted customers, and we paired them with a different contact center agent per quarter. So it helped to get contact center agents feeling a bit more involved. So it was both an engagement thing, but also it meant that in every planning meeting for a specific team or crew, we had customer service present, and they were advocating on behalf of the customer, speaking up on their behalf, but also taking the information back to the team so that the team was able to be in the loop about what was going on. So that kind of was a double-edged impact. In the last year, we've implemented a new internal initiative called Connect the Dots, which is kind of twofold. The first is every single person at Moo goes through I was going to be onboarding to begin with, but I think people need to have been within the organization for a while, so we're calling it reboarding. But it's a workshop. It's 2 hours long. It's cross-functional, so there'll be about 20 people in the room at any given time, and it has people from all throughout the organization. different levels of seniority. It's an introduction to customer experience. Why is it important? Some examples of how it correlates with revenue, why it's good for retention and advocacy and those sorts of things. But an hour and a half of it, the lion's share, is actually doing customer journey mapping. So we take a fictitious but fairly typical customer journey, and we walk through that experience. We think about the on-stage and the backstage people and things that are involved. We map out the emotions that a customer goes through. And I think getting employees to start thinking about things from the customer's perspective through the eyes of the customer, similar to what Grace was saying, what you find is that there are people who want to drink the Kool-Aid. They buy in and they want to be part of the revolution, so to speak. So from doing that, you kind of end up with your disciples who, what I'm planning to do now is to get those disciples to work on finding opportunities within those common journeys that we've mapped out, finding opportunities to build improvements. And I think the things I've described, some of it is kind of bottom up and some is top down. You have to get the buy-in from the top to give you the bandwidth to do these things, and then the bottom up is actually finding your disciples who are on the ground, the troops on the ground, who that really will bring this stuff to life and prove that there's how big that opportunity is.
So it's very similar to what Dan mentioned. It's very similar to the lunch and learn sessions that I was planning to have here, which are just lunch sessions where people come in for an hour and we talk about CX and the 6 components of CX, what CX can do, how it improves your business, how it links to revenue, and how it links to process efficiencies, etc. So I think we kind of use similar kinds of ideas, but we just call them different things. Because at the end of the day, you'll find that as a CX person, you need to get all levels of the organization onto the same page, speaking the same language. So when one talks about a customer journey map, everyone should know what a customer journey map is. And so I found those were also quite interesting here at AIG.
That's interesting. So I love that you're taking the reboarding. I thought that was really very great, Dan, to talk about that, because it does take everybody and those actions to get people's minds shifted around what it is and find those curious folks. I'd also add that we take a little bit heavier-handed approach. I guess it's kind of the carrot and the stick, right, when you're trying to implement change. And we kind of went to every part of an organization that I worked in and looked for opportunity to kind of what I would say sprinkle in CX. So, for example, we went to the PMO office and looked at our current process of how projects got aligned and assigned and how they were managed and what they were, questions they were asking and targets. And we just went through that very simple process and added in things like, at the end, we had a customer change management assessment, just a few questions that help people really think about what the impact was going to be to customer and changes to them. Also things like, do you have baselines for the measures and metrics you're going to be using for customer retention? Or when they first started it, the PMO first came, projects would first come to them, it was things like, what's the customer evidence? What's the intelligence you've used? What's the customer voice telling us why we need to change? Where does this fall on the top drivers of the organization? And then even in like our business case, so when you build a cost-benefit analysis, there was really nothing in there around the value to customer or the behaviors we were looking for that we wanted to change, like reorder rates or advocate, and the dollars tied to that. So working with our CFO to really build out how can we embed those things in things that are already going in the organization that people are already used to, and just kind of add a layer of CX to them so that people kind of had to start thinking about it a little bit, but it very quickly became very normal for them. It was just part of what they did. So that was a very specific way that we looked at how we could change the way the organization was working and thinking, like that what they need to do differently, those behaviors, which we know are really hard to change. Any other examples for the audience?
I mean, a very basic one. Go on, Grace.
Okay, so I think with us also, the reporting. So, when you look at customer numbers and feedback, and especially the complaints data that we have here, that it was just numbers. It wasn't telling a story. So one of the things I changed was taking those numbers and starting to tell a narrative and tell a story, so that you could engage the exco and get them to really understand and start to empathize about the experience and what it's doing to our revenue and what it's doing to, because we have one of our big books which has been reducing for the past 5 years. And so telling a story also helps. And it's really, and this is like a quick win, to take data and tell it and turn it into a narrative, and really also wins hearts and minds.
I want to add to that, because I think that's almost exactly what I was going to say, and it's about storytelling. I mean, I think we as CX people within organizations have a duty to kind of to market the customer. We're their brand ambassadors within the organization, and we need to find constantly innovative ways of helping internal people to connect emotionally with the customer's emotions. One of the things that we're doing at the moment is, we have great text analytics and sentiment analysis attached to feedback that we receive via our NPS survey. But what we're doing at the moment is, and we've done some trials, is actually allowing customers to leave video feedback at the end of that. And even just the small volume of videos we've got already, these videos are not data, but if we know that this, complaint X is the most common, and we've got some videos of people talking about complaint X, showing that video in an exec or a leadership meeting and really helping to bring that customer to life and to show just how fraught that emotional state for that customer can be. You can show as many dollar signs as you want, but actually just seeing someone, crying about the fact they didn't get their order in time for a specific event that was a really big, important business event for them speaks more than reading a comment that says, or looking at a number that says we delivered one thing late. So, finding a way to tell the story in a more rich and immersive way.
Well, that's very powerful, and that really does bring back a lot of what we all focus on is how customers are feeling and how people can relate to that. So we'll start then with, let's go on to kind of the next question. And I wanted to, at the beginning of the webinar, we talked a little bit about the key takeaways for folks and things that they can actually go back to their office and immediately begin to look at. So Grace, what advice would you give yourself if you were starting in a company where CX was brand new and you had all the years of experience that you have now around embedding CX? What would the one piece of advice be that you would give to somebody?
I think the first thing that I would do is I would try to understand the organization, try to understand what language they use. And I'm taking some of these cues from your presentation, Diane, at the same here in South Africa a few months ago, because it's really about understanding the lay of the land. Understand what is the metric that drives the organization, because when you eventually get to the point of developing a CX strategy and your approach, you would want to use, because you want the C-suite to understand exactly what you're doing and how it's going to aid the business in the metrics that they follow, like revenue and reducing of wastage and improving your expenses number, etc. You need to understand the language of the organization. I would suggest someone to meet with the different stakeholders, understand what is the executive for finance pushing, what is the executive for product pushing, or whatever type of company it is. Understand the lay of the land, because when you understand that, you know then how you're going to approach the business. And also it gives you a sense of who understands customer centricity and who doesn't, and actually what they think customer centricity is. So I think it's very important to do that one thing. The other thing, and I know you asked for one, but I'm giving you two answers at the moment. The other step, I think, is to understand your customers. Who are your customers? Does the company even have a persona of who, or have personas of who the customers are? Or are they just, focused on the broker or the intermediary and never really touch the customer or see or have a video to see bringing that customer to life? So I think that's another strong point, because understanding those two is, so you've got an internal view, so you understand what's happening in the organization, you understand the employees, what they're going through, and then you also have an external view of understanding what the customer's view is and what the customers are saying and how they experience the organization. Those two things, I think, will help you inform. It's not exhaustive, but it will give you a good indication of how you need to approach the business from a CX strategy perspective. So I think those two are quite key. But there's much more you can do. But I think those are that's a good starting point to really understand how you're going to push the CX agenda.
That's really good. Get a lay of the land and to really define what you're going to go do. Dan, do you have advice for anybody who's starting out and what they can go do?
Sure. I think the first thing to note is it's a marathon, not a sprint. Takes a long time. It's a strategy. You need a strategy if you want this to be a thing that lasts. It's not a single execution. It's not like do one thing and it's fixed. And as a result of that, the outcomes sometimes are not immediately apparent. So whilst there are things you might do tomorrow, you might not really feel the impact or the results of them for quite a long time. These things, like a fine wine, they appreciate and improve over time. So I agree with Grace. I think speaking to as many different people in the organization as possible, understanding their language and what makes them tick, and then really trying to think about how those different parts of the organization impact that customer journey. I think one of the biggest hurdle points for people who want to kind of put CX at the center of what they're doing is to really understand the journey that the customer goes on. Start thinking about things from the customer's perspective, not from your siloed viewpoint or from the different siloed viewpoints of the organization. And the more people that you can bring on that journey and get to kind of swivel the chair and look at it from the customer's perspective and think about it as not just, how's this email performing or how is this phone call performing, and thinking about it that there are, infinite touch points that customer will go through, and really understanding that it's the cumulative impact of all of those touch points that really gives the experience to that customer. Just trying to get your head around that mindset, and maybe even sitting down with a couple of your colleagues and just sketching on a wall or on a piece of paper those different touch points or those different stages of the journey that make up that experience will really help you to visualize what customer experience is. Customer experience is not a department, it's not a strategy, it's quite simply the experience a customer has. And I think the more that you try to understand that kind of ethos, and actually that it's mapping out that experience and thinking about it from the customer's perspective, often is a really good starting point, and will help to kind of get your juices flowing about who are the different people involved in this bit of the journey, or how can I measure the experience of this different part of the journey. That's one or two ways it all kind of wrapped up into one. The other I would say is just think about what you measure right now. And I think Grace touched on it before, like complaints are the greatest source of inspiration in some ways. Really just thinking about what data can I get my hands on where I can even just start kind of baselining what the experience looks like how many complaint calls do we get about X and Y and Z. And then if you start looking at those over time, you can start to see where there are emerging trends or things that just look like they look too high all of the time. I think that's a really good starting point, is just what data is there available to me. And then once you've got that, how can I share this data in a way that's a bit more three-dimensional.
That's perfect, Dan. Thank you for that. I would jump on both of what you were talking about and expound a little bit on this whole approach of it being really a discipline. I hear lots of CX practitioners talk about their program or their CX initiative, and they might be talking about a specific within their practice, but this is a discipline. This is, as we said, changing the way an organization works, and how you embed that is really important. I think having that purpose and using the right language, even creating a glossary. I think sometimes people just miss the small things they can do to really drive change, right? When I say customer experience, or I say voice of customer or customer intelligence, or any terms that we use, or even the organization uses inconsistently, just having a common language and demonstrating that and sharing that with the organization so that everybody's on the same page. I mean, sometimes it is these small things that seem like, really, I have to do that, but they do make a big difference, because I know we struggled in one organization to just get customer experience, everybody talking the same language about what it was as a definition. So those are again some small things. So I think that's one place to start if you're just getting on board with. Make sure everybody is talking the same language, and then as you both said, go and understand the language they're using and how you can use that language when you're talking with them, such as the results they're after and what their goals are and what they're concerned about. Okay, so we're kind of at the end. Is there anything else that Dan and Grace you want to add to the conversation before we say goodbye to our audience?
One small thing. So I work for a company called Moo. We sell business cards, but I also am a very willing listener and helper. So if you're lacking inspiration of what to do tomorrow and you want to ask for some help, I'm more than happy to receive LinkedIn notes and messages, and I'm more than happy to kind of meet people in person, either in London or jump on a phone call for half an hour to give any advice directly if people are interested. So don't be a stranger. Sharing is caring.
I love that. I will echo that same thing. That's part of what the CXPA, the association, does, is really help support folks. And there's lots of practitioners out there, including Dan, who are part of the association and can talk with folks and really help share. And that's what's great about the profession, is that the people who are in this profession, like you're hearing Grace and Dan talk about, love to share what they've done and learn and help others. It's just part of, we know how tough the road is. We understand it seems like you're staring down the train, the train light coming down the end of the tunnel every day. Just giving you some ideas and some hope and some understanding of what you're facing and ways to approach it is really important. Rose, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Can I just say one last thing?
Oh, sure, Grace.
Yeah.
Grace, did you want to share? Grace, did you want to wrap up your contribution?
Yes. I think I also echo the sentiment. It's a lonely road, and I think what I really want to emphasize on is, I think if you've got the opportunity to engage people in the CX environment, do so, because it not only strengthens you as an individual, but it's the power that you can get from multiple perspectives. You may be looking at a problem in your organization and be thinking, I really don't know what to do, or I've tried everything, I'm at the end of my wits and I want to quit my job. Reach out to someone in the CX industry, reach out to any one of us, and just get a different perspective. And you'll find that those perspectives and the relationships in the CX community will actually help you stay and also build you. And you'll develop a resilience. And that's what I've experienced. I mean, I've realized I've relationships all over the world. And it's really, really enriched me as an individual, and it's really helped me to see things from a different point of view and see how you can actually make an impact where you're thinking, you're at your wit's end and you really want to give up now. So do use the community and reach out when and when you can.
I always laugh. It takes a village to raise a customer experience. So don't feel alone. Reach out to somebody when you hit that. When you're in that maze and you hit that, where am I supposed to go now? There's people who have been there and can share their stories. So thanks for your generosity in doing that. Rose, we'll turn it back over to you to wrap up and talk a little bit about the event coming up.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you, Dan and Grace, for taking the time to share your insights with everybody today. And as a note, next week is our Chief Customer Officer Europe event. It'll be taking place in London on Tuesday, the 9th of October. So we invite everybody to head over to our website, which you can see on your screen right now, to find out more information about our event. After our Europe event, our next event will be in the U.S. in January, and we'll be hosting CCO USA in Atlanta, Georgia. You can also visit cco-us.craniumintelligence.com for more information about that event. Again, thank you so much for listening in today. Thank you so much for our talented speakers, and we look forward to welcoming you to another webinar soon.